So, apart from medieval reenactment, some of you might be wondering, what do I get up to when I'm not making videos? Well, this might give you something of a clue. Yeah, I'm quite bitten by the tabletop wargaming bug. And yes, those are the Emperor's Glorious Banana Boys. But as you might imagine from looking at this, the vast majority of the collection on this particular cupboard is from a steampunk tabletop naval wargame called Dystopian Wars. The original company that owned it sadly went into administration almost 3 years ago now. But as you can see, I was probably one of their biggest fans, and what you're seeing there, all the painted stuff, that's not even a tithe of the collection. Some more 40k stuff there, mostly for Rogue Trader RPG nights. Now, why am I showing you all of this? And also vaguely showing you the many boxes of unpainted miniatures. Yes, I have pretty much a cupboard of shame, as I'm sure most mini wargamers actually do. Well, it's to establish that yes, I do actually have a very long-term and vested interest in the Dystopian Wars in particular. This isn't just random and out of the blue. And so I was very pleased to receive this from Warcradle, the new owners of the Dystopian Wars IP. I did try and buy the IP at the time of the Spartan going out of business, but it turns out Warcradle have more money than me by a long way. Anyway, I was sent this just because they knew from some other fans of Dystopian Wars that I was a big fan. They didn't actually know, and I'm pretty sure they still won't know until this video, know that I also run this channel. So I think this is going to be as much of a surprise to them as receiving these miniatures was to me. So this, with my clumsy efforts at unboxing, I'm not very good at this, is a preview sprue of some new Russian ships, and the old Russian ships were the ones in grey that you saw at the beginning. These have been sent out to a number of people for review. Given that this was a preview box, they very considerately sent me a PDF showing how to actually build the things, although as you can probably tell from the instructions, they are fairly easy to understand. There are 2 escorts. They appear to just be the first set of instructions. They build fairly quickly and easily. There is only one variant. The cruiser, however, appears to be able to be built in 4 different variants. There are 2 sterns and 2 bows, plus a ton of different weapons. So I guess maybe there's even more variants than the 4 primary hull forms. But we shall find out how that all works as this review continues. The old models were blocks of resin, so guns, bridge tower, hull, so they were slightly easier to put together than these. These are all plastic, but let's compare. I'll be trying to approach this from the perspective of a relatively new person to the tabletop wargaming hobby, as, well, to be honest, that was me for a very long time. I'm slightly better now, but I wouldn't say I'm all that much better. For example, my mold line remover, I have one because I understand you're supposed to have one. It sits in its box. I think I took it out once to look at it, and that was about it. So I've just got my old clippers. I think those clippers are probably old enough to vote these days. But I decided let's get some of the escorts off the sprue first, since that seemed fairly a sensible thing to do, since they're the smaller models, and see how it all goes together. And because you don't want to watch me cutting bits off of a sprue for several minutes, let's just quickly speed up the rest of that process. Isn't technology wonderful? So take the 5 pieces of your basic escort. You've got 2 sides, 1 deck, and 2 bits of the superstructure, and add a little bit of super glue to the sides of the deck, at least in my case. Don't use liquid poly because it keeps going up on me. And the sides of the hull also do have a couple of little locking features so that to help you guide them in and make sure you don't get them completely wrong. There is one additional piece that will come to a bit later, which is a little shield thing that sticks on the front to complete the bow ornamentation, but that's something for later on. The superstructure, once it's together, just sits on top, slots in quite neatly. There is, in fact, a little bit of trimming to do because on the front of the superstructure there are 2 tiny pipes that stick out. They're meant to blend in with 2 pipes on the deck. And the instructions do actually say to trim them slightly so that you get a nice snug fit. Compared to the old models, which escort sides tended to come as single resin pieces, obviously this is a little bit more involved, but not massively. For a test sprue, this is actually very high quality. I was quite impressed by the quality of the plastic. It was quite rigid without being brittle, and it cut quite easily. The only other minor issue is that you can probably see there's a little bit of a seam line on that superstructure, although, to be fair, that may just be down to me not cutting it out particularly well, but I think maybe that could be a very, very slight area for improvement. Still, with all that said, even with me having to reattach the sides, because you might have noticed I accidentally disintegrated it with too much pressure from my fingers the first time, it took less than 2.5 minutes to go from parts to a fully assembled ship, so that's not bad at all. And then, having learned my lesson and having a stopwatch, I assembled the second one in just a fraction under 2 minutes. And whilst as I do say, there is a little bit of a visible seam on the superstructure line there, it is fortunately horizontal as opposed to back to front, so you're not going to have a misaligned superstructure or anything like that. So again, it's not too bad. You can see at the front there, the little slot where the shield will go later on. And there you can see the rest of the two sprues made up the cruiser parts. So I got those off in a fairly quick amount of time, and that yielded these sections. And once all the hull parts are off the sprue, I divided them up into their little sections. So I got all the bits of the bridge here, chimneys and whatnot. You've then got the long bow just there, which has a gun and a turret mounting on it. Next to it is the shorter bow section, which just has a plate forward and a single turret mounting, both with hull sides. You've then got the shorter stern section and the longer stern section, which has a second turret mounting. And then you have these two hull panels, which are needed to put together any variant of the cruiser. So, having put them all together, you can see they're the four major components of the ship, plus the two side sections, plus the completed bridge superstructure. Now, of course, this means that in theory, you can only build one of the four cruiser variants, which means you will have a fair bit of stuff left over, although that does mean there are opportunities for kit bashing, because if you stick the spare bow and spare stern together, you've just got to try and kit bash some amidships part of the hull and something to go on as a bridge, but I came up with a slightly better idea. You see, there are locking lugs on those two side plates, which means that if you're careful, you can actually put a cruiser together, and then you pop the superstructure on, which locks everything in place nice and firmly. And then if you want to assemble another kind of cruiser, assuming you haven't glued these bits beyond what you see here, you can just lift the stern slightly, pop it all apart, obviously having taken off the superstructure, and reassemble another type of cruiser. And I think someone who's a little bit more skilled with square magnets or something will be able to make a magnetized version. Now, it did take me a little while to remember exactly which paint scheme I'd used on my old Russian ships, but it turned out it was one of my more simple ones. So you can see here, this is the sum total of all the paints I use on the ship. So you've got the Mechanicum Grey standard as a base coat. The Balthasar Gold forms most of the highlights of guns and pipes and such like. The Gawthor Brown there is the deck, and the Fang is for some of the roofs, and then of course we can't go anywhere without a little pot of liquid skill in the form of Nuln Oil on the left, and then a little Tamiya weathering set on the bottom, which gives it a little bit of a nice finish, although I only use the burnt orange. And after a short bit of painting, waiting for the paint to dry and then applying the weathering, this was the result for the biggest cruiser that I could put together. It looks pretty good. You see a couple of the turrets there. It came with a bunch of turrets. You didn't see those earlier, but there's quite a few of them. I'll show you a bit more of the rest of the sprues later. And in the background you can see I also got some of the older Russian ships from the old Spartan games design to compare and contrast. One thing I am particularly happy with is that the new weapons appear to fit the old turret rings, because this is one of the older ships stuck the new weapons on. They fit quite the treat, so it does seem to blend in from that perspective at least. And then I realised that taking photos of dark ships on a white background was probably a stupid idea, and so here's the little flotilla. So you can see in the middle there the new cruiser and the remnant bits of what's the other parts for the shorter cruiser just in the background. The two little escorts flanking two of the different escorts from the older version. You can see one of the Popov inspired ones, and then one of the slightly more conventional, slightly longer escorts there in the middle. So you can see there are a few differences. The new ones are slightly more ornamented with those bow ornaments. The superstructure is slightly different, but I think overall they actually blend in pretty well, especially once they're all painted up. To me personally, about the only really glaring difference is probably going to be the main turrets, because pretty much all the Dystopian Wars turrets in the older versions, apart from the Antarcticans, were various flavours on conventional naval gun turrets, whereas you can see here the newer turrets are a little bit more esoteric and high-tech. I also decided to field test my idea of using the single cruiser as all four at once, and you can see here I added the shorter stern to the back there, and it seemed to work out fairly well. This brings up the only other minor criticism I have from a build perspective, which is you can hopefully see just there. The shorter stern section doesn't quite seem to fit as flush with the rest of the ship as the longer stern section does. Maybe a very, very slight issue with the moulding and casting. I did have a very close look at it to make sure it wasn't me just building it wrong, but it's a relatively minor detail, although for absolute model purists you probably will be breaking out the green stuff, Milliput or equivalent. But it should be a relatively easy thing to fix, I think, with a second run of the sprue production. These are the spare parts that were left over, so there's a couple of shields there for the bows. You get 6 little shields, 2 of each type, so you can guess we put 2 on the escorts, 2 on the bows of the cruiser types, and then you get 2 left over. You have 3 of these sort of forky turrets, so which are the ones I painted up. You get 3 of these mortar bombard units, 1 I painted up, 2 more here, and then 3 more what look like energy gun turrets of some description, and then there are also 6 different generator type units which can replace a gun turret on a mounting. Not entirely sure what they do, but I'm pretty sure at least one of them is a shield generator. So overall, what do I think of them? Well, as I said, the plastic quality is pretty good. I'm quite impressed with that. The ease of buildability, I guess, also good. I probably, for the amount of stuff that's on the sprue, I probably would have liked to have been able to build 2 cruisers, but I can understand what they're doing there. And I actually do appreciate the fact you can have so many build options off of a single sprue. It does actually remind me of Battlefleet Gothic, with the endless combinations of Imperial and Chaos Cruiser that you could pull off. And as I said, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to realise that you can actually build and paint up all the components of the cruiser, and with a little bit of careful work, swap the bits out as you need. And as I say, I suspect someone with a little bit more experience in magnetisation than me can probably make that even easier. Aesthetics-wise, I'm actually quite pleased with them. They are different, and, well, I suppose if you're going to change things slightly, they are going to end up somewhat different, but they stick a lot closer to the original design style, at least for these Russian ships, than I was perhaps worried that about the route they might have gone. So yeah, points there. About the only criticism I'd really put on the aesthetic side of things would be that whilst they have kept the sort of slightly odd tower funnel superstructures from the old design, there aren't any actual funnels that I can see. I might actually bore out that top stack there just to make it a funnel. And yes, I know it's half steampunk, half sci-fi, so I'm not like going to jump down their throats about realism, because, well, this is a game that has gigantic flying aerial battleships, so yeah. But yes, some kind of funnel for the engines would be appreciated, I think. I will be very interested to see how this goes. With the old game, you could get a whole slew of escorts for most of the different nations, but of course, mostly being one-piece resin models, you had to buy them all separately. With the plastic, there is, I guess, the opportunity to have a common hull and different deck plates which can change out the loadouts, maybe even different superstructures. So it'll be interesting to see how they go on that, or if they're just going to plan to stick with a single type of escort. But overall, thank you to Warcradle for sending me that sample through. It was a very fun few hours putting this all together and painting it. And, well, I look forward to the starter set, which, as of the time of recording, has just dropped for pre-order. So that's, from what I can tell, Russia versus Antarctica. I will, of course, be looking out for the Britannian units, which you may have noticed in good old Royal Navy colours at the start of the video, because shockingly enough, I'm a big fan of them. But as you probably saw, I'm also a big fan of quite a few of the other factions. So, well, I have a cupboard of shame to get onto painting before everything gets released. But thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for watching. Let me know what you think of this kind of content for the occasional Fun Friday. As I've said before, this is not going to impact the normal output of the channel. It's just something that I thought might be interesting to people. Also, if you've got any tips for lighting, filming surfaces, that kind of stuff for showing models and building and painting models on camera, please do let me know, because, well, this is literally the carpet upon which I normally build and paint. I don't mind, but I appreciate it might not necessarily be the best viewing service for people who are watching this on a phone or computer screen. So, again, any tips and tricks are greatly appreciated. And, well, I have a few weeks off over the holidays before the grinding wheels of bureaucracy eventually turn and the good old P45 shows up in the new year. But until that time, I guess I'll probably have to get stuck into my Victory at Sea collection as well, and can show you all of those wonderful ships.
That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship to review, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to comment on the pinned post for dry dock questions.